Well, the haters gonna hate, 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 and the fakers gonna fake, 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 baby. I'm just gonna make, making luck, a Dominion podcast. Welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast. We're back for another episode. My name is Adam, and with me, as always, is my co-host Jake. How are you, Jake?
I'm good. Sorry, VP tokens. I'm good, Adam. I am good.
Hope you didn't swallow any of them.
I hope so too, but isn't that the ultimate victory?
Wait, the ultimate victory is swallowing victory point tokens.
It's internalizing your victory points.
Literally. Wait, is that a pun on, like, internalizing the points of the podcast? Like, we made the points and the listener has internalized them?
I don't know, but I'm glad these are made in America so I don't get lead poisoning. But, anyway.
Hashtag the important things.
Hashtag the important things. So
yeah, I guess you've got those kind of things going through your mind right now.
Yeah, they're going through a lot of parts of my body. My mind is one of them. But
Thanks for sharing.
I'm ready to. So this episode, we're going to talk about a couple of things. We had a tournament over the weekend that was a lot of fun and very successful. Yours truly got to compete, and Adam was actually the host of the tournament, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And the meat of the podcast is going to be when trashing isn't always the best idea. So it'll be good discussion.
Yeah. So, I had a tournament, and a whole bunch of people went. We had 23 people, which is the biggest turnout I've ever had for a tournament that I've hosted. And, that's really exciting for me because there were a lot of people that showed up who I didn't know were coming and weren't part of, like, friend groups or board gaming groups that I'm directly involved in. Like, I didn't know these people directly.
They were randos.
Well, they weren't randos.
Yeah.
I asked them how they like found out about the tournament, and some of them were like, "Well, I found it on Reddit," or like some of them said, "Oh, well, so and so told me," and I know so and so, for example. So what I'm really hoping that word of mouth is getting out about these tournaments that I run, and it's positive enough that these people are coming and that they're going to come back, and Dominion's going to explode with popularity 11 years after the initial release of the game.
Well, and if it does, and these tournaments explode in particular, it's for good reason because, Adam has been hosting tournaments for a really long time as far as Dominion TOs go, and he has a really successful and established method. Everyone typically has a pretty good time.
Yeah, I've been refining things. I've been seeing what people have fun with and doing more of those and not doing the things that aren't fun. So I've had about 3 years to do that, and I'd like to think I've gotten a little bit better at it. I just try and focus on the fun aspect, and it usually attracts enough people who travel in. So it's nice to have some positive reinforcement that, like, hey, the way I'm promoting it is working, the venue seems happy, and, it would be really nice to continue that. And, man, I have these aspirations of affecting the RGG's official tournament and trying to get their support on more events, maybe at some conventions that aren't too far away. I know it's a little pipe dreamy, but, it would be really nice to get them in on all of my tournaments, so just the half of them that they're okay with because they don't like two-player Dominion. So,
the success of this tournament in particular might be a positive step in that direction because this was a two-player Dominion tournament, and it went really well.
Yeah, I was really happy with the turnout, and I think a lot of people, I want to say a lot of people had fun. The people that I talked to, and then for me personally also, I know that your girlfriend had experienced some frustration in earlier tournaments and has really working hard to improve the quality of her play, and it's not exactly visible, and yeah, you should really speak about this more than I should.
Well, absolutely. I want to bring us back to actually a couple of episodes ago. We talked about tournaments and we talked about the kinds of people who show up. One of the points I made was as a note of encouragement to somebody to go to a tournament and play in it. and that was geared at people who are thinking they're not good enough to go to a Dominion tournament, and saying, trust me, you are good enough. I promise you that you're better at Dominion than you think you are. Everybody in Dominion undervalues their skill, it seems like, except for the people who overvalue their skill, and don't worry, they're not listening to this podcast. But my girlfriend, her name is Jessica, and I'm giving her a shout out because she is definitely one of those people who undervalues her skill at Dominion. Part of that is because all the games of Dominion she plays, for the most part, are against me and Adam. Adam is the world champion, and I'm pretty good. And so she doesn't realize a lot of the time how good she is because her win rate doesn't reflect that. So she started to think she's not such a good player, regardless of all the coaching that we've given her to the contrary, that we have to actually work pretty hard to beat her. And she played in this tournament, and she performed very well. She played very well that day, and she made the cut to the top. Guess who didn't make the cut to the top? Me.
I didn't either, just saying.
You weren't even in it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Jessica, I know she was playing well, not because I played her in the tournament. She was actually in too high of a bracket for me to play her in the tournament. But we played afterward, and she beat the pants off me. So she was definitely on that day, and her performance definitely showed it in the tournament. She almost made it into the prize pool. Like, she was really
one game away.
well.
Yeah, and might I add, she was not close to the bubble of advancing. Like, she was one tournament point, which is less than a game result, away from the top of everything.
Yeah.
She was in a tie for second. So, like, I mean, she was right up there towards the top, the hashtag cream of the crop. So, I mean, that just goes to show you that, like, you know, a good player like you can have a bad day, but, like, you can really show that, like, hey, I'm good at this. I can compete with a lot of people, even if you don't think you can. And tournaments are a really good opportunity to expose yourself to a wide variety of people of different skill levels or different styles of play. So, I mean, tournaments are super great, and
That's the other thing. Adam has made the point before about the best way to improve your game is by playing things that you don't know are best, or that you
the way I say
haven't tried before.
Yeah, the way I say it is, if you always play what you think is best, you'll never improve at the game.
A tournament is a fantastic way to showcase that, because if you are playing with the same people all the time, you're probably playing with people who have similar biases towards certain cards, and you're probably seeing similar strategies every time. Whereas really getting out there and forcing yourself to play with a different group of people can be a great experience, and it can teach you a lot about Dominion.
Yep.
And
you're
about life.
See people do things that you think are bad, and then it turns out they're not.
Yeah.
That's how you get better.
Totally. Yeah. I played real badly in the tournament, by the way, and my record showed it. But it's okay. You need to give yourself permission to play badly. That's part of developing. I'm going to rationalize it that way. Yes.
It's easier to get better at the game from a loss than it is from a win, because you don't have that crutch of, well, I won this game, so I must have played it perfectly, so then you're not motivated to think critically about everything you did. Where if you have a loss, you have that motivation to say, hey, I clearly needed to do something better. Let's go find it.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I had a really good time at the tournament. And you, Adam, have made the point that in all of your tournaments, at least whoever won has played very well.
Yeah.
And it's fun, even if it's not you. It's really awesome to watch somebody playing that well at Dominion.
Yeah, for sure.
It's kind of an art form at a certain point.
Yeah, there have been tournaments I've watched. There's one I have in mind. There was a Donate Market Square board that I'm just watching, and one guy's like, yeah, I think every move he made was perfect. Ben, you know who you are. And you know the inappropriate comment I made while watching your play. But anyway, so there were sandwiches at the tournament in honor of the podcast sandwich, and those sandwiches had bread. And
he literally made sandwiches, by the way. He is taking this metaphor very seriously.
I mean, I thought it was appropriate to do.
Yeah.
So if you're here from the tournament because of the sandwiches or maybe the shameless plugging that I did, hi, thanks for listening. I hope you like the podcast and I hope you like all of the other stuff that I shamelessly plugged to you. But also, it's given me this craving for bread. I want some bread.
Delicious bread.
Yeah.
So the bread this time is going to be about a kingdom that Adam and I talked about at the end of last episode. Every episode we try to talk about first the kingdom we played last week, and then we talk about the kingdom at the end that we're going to play next week. So
That's
last week's episode was about develop the card. And so we forced it into this kingdom so we could not just talk about the kingdom, but also develop and what develop does and doesn't do on it.
Wow. So for this piece of white bread using bleached flour, which, I learned causes depression because why would you eat that? But that's what we had left over from the tournament, and that's what I've been eating for my lunch all week. Not that I'm mad about it, but we had Hamlet, Amulet, Develop, Leprechaun, Village, Conspirator, Moneylender, Port, Vault, Wharf. We had Inheritance and Fountain. Once again, for our audio-only listeners, or maybe for those of you who are like craving some kind of flavor out of this terrible white bread, metaphorically, Hamlet, Amulet, Develop, Leprechaun, Village, Conspirator, Moneylender, Port, Vault, Wharf, and there's Inheritance and Fountain. So I believe last time I said I wanted to open Develop Moneylender. I thought Develop would be significant, and I said that Wharf Split, Wharf being the best source of draw on the board, would probably be game decisive. It was that important, but I would certainly be prioritizing shoving a bunch of Wharves in the deck at a certain point. I was not sure about how much I wanted to trash because of Inheritance or Fountain.
And on a 5-2, you obviously open Hamlet, Wharf or Wharf Hamlet or some iteration of that. But on a 3-4, which is more common, you have some interesting decisions to make here, definitely.
Yeah, and you said you were thinking about opening, what was it, like you had talked about Amulet in the opening?
Yeah. I actually had a few things I was waffling between. Develop Port was talked about, and I think we decided that ended up being the best opener, but the other things I was talking about involved Amulets or Leprechaun for high payload early on. And a Develop was probably a strong consideration no matter what, simply to top deck silvers out of my estates.
Or any of those other things that you decide you might want in the moment.
Right.
Hashtag let the universe decide.
A really powerful thing that we pointed out was possible at the end of last episode and was definitely very powerful throughout the game no matter what you opened was you want develops and ports because you can develop a port into a top-decked village and wharf. And the only thing better than having terminal draw and villages in your deck is getting to top deck terminal villages and draw and ensure that they collide. It's fantastic.
That's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say like a really good flavorful whole grain bread.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely in line with the metaphor.
Yeah.
It's orange bread.
Yeah.
This time.
Orange bread.
Duration bread.
Yeah, duration bread. So yeah, I didn't really take the Develop Port opening seriously because you're opening with a village and like that's bad pretty much all of the time. But like I think you had mentioned it. I know Trivial Knot had mentioned it in the forums when we were looking for feedback, and so we tried it, and it turns out that is a lot better than Develop Moneylender. Now, like all these openings are high variance. You know, of course you want the Develop and the ports to collide, and you don't want the Develop and the Moneylender to collide. Even though it's not that bad, you just develop the Moneylender, but then you're better off with the ports.
Against Village Wharf.
Right.
Right.
But you know, you would have been better off with the port there. And you know, there are lots of different ways each opening can shake out that can reward you or punish you. And so the thing that I really liked about Develop Port, though, is Wandering Winder did a little bit of mathematical calculation about Develop Port. And if you factor in most of the situations that can happen you have over a 50% chance of lining up a develop and a port on turn 3 and turn 4. And that does include on turn 3, you see your develop without a port, but you develop an estate and top deck another develop, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, I mean, if that does happen to you, it sounds bad because it's not what you wanted, but it's actually really good because then you end up with 2 develops in your deck and the result that you had wanted before. So.
Yeah, having extra develops is pretty nice when you have a lot of villages in your deck. And so you opened port, you're not hurting for terminal space. You have these targets of things that you really want to be developing. So it's not that bad. And you can just develop into a conspirator and a Hamlet, and that's just fine as well. So there are enough good options with develop that spamming them is fine, as long as you aren't going to line up terminal collision deliberately. Usually it's a pretty good thing to have them in your deck or have them on top of your deck.
Yeah, there's quite a few cards you want quantity of here that are 2 coins apart. So we talked about in the last episode, that's one of the tells to look for. Yeah. If develop is going to be a strong card, it definitely is here. The other thing that we ended up coming across was the question of what you want to trash and when, and that became a really interesting discussion. We, I think, decided that Moneylender didn't make the cut here.
Yeah, that's like that's the other reason that I didn't like the Moneylender opening, because I mean the effect, trashing coppers is fine, but Wharf is kind of one of the cases where you can get away with keeping your coppers. And the fact is, this game ended, I think every single game that we tested ended on turn 10. It was uncanny how every single one of them was turn 10. And, they all end on piles. The game is over super fast. And having a really fast option of scoring a buttload of points by just shoving a few coppers in your deck with extra buys was really nice. And your buys are limited here. The Wharf pile is gone, and hopefully you got a few of them, but you also want to be doing some other stuff with your buys besides buying 5 coppers because you trashed 2 of them to a Moneylender early on.
Right, and you probably do want to be buying the coppers at some point because the fountain points in the presence of excessive draw like Wharf are kind of free in a way. Like, there's so much here to help you not care about the fact that you have 10 coppers in your deck that you're kind of insane not to be going for the fountain points. In a way,
it's a consideration. It really should be a consideration. You shouldn't just trash coppers willy-nilly because you want them gone. The deck is better without them, but points are really good. 15 is a lot of points. And if your opponent has that option and you don't, and the game is pretty much over because piles are super low, that you can lose games that way. So it's very important to not go crazy thinning those coppers. Like, you can develop a copper maybe if you have nothing better to do, but getting the Moneylender, man, it just didn't do it for me.
And Adam had mentioned kind of retracting his statement on how important the Wharf split was. It turns out if you lose at 6-4, it's really not the end of the world because even without all the extra buys and draws from the Wharf, there's enough here to control your deck and gain a bunch of cards that, again, the game ending on turn 10 like it always did, what really won this game wasn't any strategy in particular because there are several strong ones. What won this game was end game options and who set themselves up to have more of them.
Yeah, just skillful play in general and keeping in mind all of the gains that your opponent has, wishes they haven't played, develop when you're dancing around piles, which I think each of us screwed up like every single time because that's really hard to do.
Yeah, that was usually the decisive factor is somebody pulled a 3 pile we didn't see coming. Right. And for the record, it's really hard to see a 3 pile coming on this board because piles evaporate. Yeah. Like, you buy a port, you're not actually buying a village. You're buying 2 4-cost cards, and those can quickly be anything. And also, Wharf makes it really easy to control how many cards you have in play. And if you can play Leprechaun to gain a gold and a wish, I shouldn't have to tell you that's good. It's really good.
Yeah, so like there's multiple options for your payload here, and they can be influenced by how many of the warves you got, right? If you can shove conspirators in the deck really fast, you could inherit conspirators and then develop 3 costs into conspirator estate, and that's super great. And that doesn't really eat up a lot of your draw. Or you can just add 1 leprechaun at one point in time, and now you've got these golds coming in. If you have a lot of draw, that's super great because you can, gain and play a wish on the same turn. You won't have trouble drawing the golds, and you can focus your buys and future gains on other stuff besides more conspirators.
And you usually don't care too much about the hexes here. There are a few that'll screw you over if you get them at the wrong time, but...
I mean, if Poverty can lose me the game, Poverty is the one where you discard down to 3. Like, if I have my deck in my hand, I'm not going to play a Leprechaun for a gold if Poverty is going to lose me the game, right? But
or Misery. Misery is the best way to lose the game. All of a sudden, I can't win. Yeah.
Most miserable way to lose the game, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Let's see what I did there.
Oh, I saw it. The other thing that we talked about was Inheritance. Originally, I had actually said that I thought Inheritance was a trap here. I thought that the deck was going to be too fast-paced to make use of Inheritance. Estates were too easy to get rid of. And there were some games where that became true, but Inheritance actually a lot of the time was still a good idea. And what it came down to was less deciding at the beginning of the game, I'm going for Inheritance, and more deciding in the middle of the game, you hit 7, and trying to remember how many estates you have left in your deck. And if it's 2 or more, yeah, buy the Inheritance.
Yeah, I found myself not keeping the estates around because I wanted to inherit something. So, like, there was one game where I opened 5-2, and I had a draw that led me to think, oh, hey, if I get a silver this turn, I have, like, I think it was a 60-40 chance or something like that of spiking 7 on turn 4 because I played the War of turn 3. And I decided to go for it because there wasn't much downside to it. And, like, it happened, and so I inherited, I think, Village at that point because Conspirator wasn't good in my deck yet. So, like, yeah, that was fine, but that was a very particular situation, and really just deciding in the moment when you have more information about the current game state, that was a lot. I had a lot more success with whether or not I was going to go for Inheritance, and that's, I really like the idea of putting off as many decisions as you can in Dominion until later on in the game when you have more information. I don't have to decide if I'm going for Leprechaun or if I'm going for Conspirator as part of my payload. I don't have to decide that until I see what's happened, what I'm doing, what my opponent's doing.
How the cards have shuffled out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and keeping yourself flexible has the advantage as well of being less punished by bad shuffles. Like, if you go for a certain strategy and the cards don't line up a certain way, and you've committed to that, you are kind of sad. Whereas if you are playing your game in a way that you're formulating your strategy based on how your cards are shuffling out in the situation you're in, you tend to be in a much stronger mid-game.
Yeah, that's kind of like why trashing is good, right?
Right.
Because you're more flexible when you trash cards.
Yeah, it's easier to pivot.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, speaking of trashing... I mean, my favorite kind of lunch meat is pretty much anything that isn't trash, right?
Yeah, I like the kind of lunch meat that is usually not there because you trashed it.
Yeah.
Did that...
That was pretty good, yeah. That was a good segue.
Thanks.
I like
all right.
That.
So...
Nice. So, yeah. That was so good.
So today's episode topic is about why you sometimes don't want to trash.
Oh my God. That was the best segue ever.
I think as Dominion players, for the most part, we have kind of understood the value of trashing, at least acknowledged it. But today we're going to talk about the situations where trashing isn't the optimal play, when you have the ability to trash and choose not to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the times when you don't want to trash are the times when you can't trash. All right, good podcast. Let's talk about the next game. Chapel.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, when the times when you are not wanting to trash are only the times when it's not available. We did it. We solved Dominion.
Yep. GG.
We're good at this game.
Yeah, so I think for the purposes of the rest of this meet, we can just assume that, hey, you have the tools to trash, and now we're answering the question, do I want to do this?
Yeah, and the answer to that being no requires a few things.
Yeah.
Before we get into why you wouldn't want to trash, we are going to talk a little bit about when you do and why. The purpose of that is that, yes, we all know that trashing is good, but to understand why you sometimes don't, you don't just need to understand that you don't need to trash. You need to understand why you trash in the first place, fundamentally.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to talk about why trashing is good, and then when we want to talk about when we don't trash, you just look at when you're not getting those things.
Yes, and if you have an understanding of the function that trashing actually plays, it's easier to understand when you don't need that and why you're playing the deck that you're playing. So the short answer to this is never, and you always want to trash all your cards immediately, as quickly as you can. And if you ever are playing a board where you can't trash, it's time to rage like a child and demand that your opponent put in the tools for you to trash. And you get bonus points if, while you're throwing a tantrum, your opponent finds some secret way to thin his deck that you didn't see.
Yeah.
Chapel.
Yeah. We did it, guys.
Yeah. So trashing and why you wouldn't want to do it. The brief notes on why trashing is good from really a theoretical perspective is something that it's kind of weird for people to get their heads around if they're coming from other card games. Because in Dominion, when you put a card into your deck, gaining it and deriving value from it, it's just usually by playing it, that doesn't really occur as a one-to-one exchange. And that's because in Dominion, you are shuffling your cards. In fact, in the thematic world of Dominion, time is not measured in weeks, it's measured in shuffles. People grow up in shuffles and plan their lives around shuffles. And farmers go to bed at night wondering how many shuffles they have left until they go back to the earth. And that's kind of how the silver is, too. So you buy a silver... Dominion is a very thematic game, Adam.
How many shuffles old are you, little Timmy? Why, I'm 4 shuffles old.
Yester shuffle, I was... So, let's think about this for a minute. Let's think about buying a silver. That's a pretty common...
I love doing that.
Yeah, we do it all the time. And a lot of the time, a very new player to Dominion looks at silver and sees that it costs 3 and gives you 2 money, but 2 is a lower number than 3. Why would you do that? It's because you put the silver into your deck and eventually you're going to shuffle it and you're going to draw it. And now you have the silver, and instead of drawing a copper or an estate, you have $2, and that's the value of the silver.
Yeah.
And then, assuming that you've got those 10 starting cards still, you put the silver into your discard pile and you don't see it again until you draw every other card in your deck, and then you shuffle and draw it again. Now,
okay, can I take my shirt off real quick?
You're going to have to, because we're getting into another thought experiment.
Oh, okay.
Things are going to get weird here. So let's think instead that you have trashed all of your starting cards. There are no cards in your deck.
Cards are dumb.
You gain that same silver. And now, instead of that silver being in a third of your hands, it's in every single hand. Every hand has a silver in it because you bought one. And now you're getting those plus $2 every turn, and you can buy an estate every single turn. Wow. It's time to move into the end game.
Hashtag it's time to move into the end game.
I know that we're getting a little bit weird here, and these things kind of make more sense in an actual game of Dominion than trying to talk about them in some weird thought experiment, but that's the general idea of how gaining cards in Dominion and deriving value from them doesn't really occur one-to-one, and why you trash cards in the first place.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, these are extreme examples, right? One card in a big deck is less impactful than one card in a small deck. And, you know, if you're coming from another card game, The idea of thinning your deck is something that either doesn't make sense or seems like it makes sense, but is actually not a concept that's helpful, depending on the game and depending on how you're using it. So like the fact that you shuffle your deck once or maybe multiple times in most of the games of Dominion that you play, like that's the big thing here. In Magic, you don't shuffle your discard into your deck. That's not a thing that you do. Once you've
Right.
moved your deck into your discard, like the game's over, right? Like you lose the game, I think is what happens. So
Right.
so Dominion is different because you shuffle your discard into your deck, and so that's why these concepts make a lot of sense. And those extreme examples of the concept are why trashing is this, unique thing in Dominion. And it turns out it's really OP.
And part of the reason that it is so OP, again, coming back to the comparison of Magic, you don't shuffle your deck into your discard pile in Magic. So here's the difference. In Magic, you understand that draw is good. Pretty much every card game under the sun, you understand that drawing cards is really good. It's how you do things. If you're shuffling your deck into your discard pile, understanding the theory that every new card in your deck doesn't get seen until you've drawn every other card, then trashing a card is kind of like drawing it for free every single shuffle. That's of course assuming
Sorry,
you're
I
okay
put
with
my
not.
shirt back on. I need to take it back off again.
Yeah, I
Continue.
know we're getting weird here, but that's of course assuming that you're okay with not having the card. If the estate if is not doing anything for your deck, or the copper isn't doing enough for your deck, then it's something that you are having to draw through to get to the cards that you've bought and you do want. So trashing them is in a way like drawing them for free once per shuffle.
Yeah, I mean, in Magic, if you have a bad card in your deck, what you do is you just don't put the card in your deck and you find some other better card to put in your deck instead. That's how you deal with that in Magic. In Dominion, you don't get to do that. You start with 10 bad cards in your deck at the start of the game, and you have to deal with that while you're playing the game. So, yes, taking bad cards out of your Magic deck and putting good ones in instead, that's really OP. If you don't do that, you're probably going to lose games of Magic. And so it's similar in Dominion, right? You start the game with 10 bad cards in your deck, and if you don't get rid of them, and you can, obviously, you're going to be way behind. And so,
Yeah.
like, you have... There are bad cards in Dominion, and you don't want them.
Exactly. And the earlier you do it, the fewer times that you have to draw through the cards after you've shuffled to get to the good ones.
Yeah, like, if I could do it before the game started, I would, but I can't. So let's just do it as soon as humanly possible in the game of Dominion.
Yeah, I mean, you can cheat. Like sometimes you can hand your opponent an extra copper and only start with 6 and no estates.
I'm sorry, zaps are not a thing anymore. That died with GoKo.
Don't bring us back to the GoKo.
Hey, I didn't do it. You were the one that talked about cheating, and
I'm sorry.
never again, Jake. This is your final
All right.
warning.
Sorry. That was
Yeah.
my hand being slapped.
Yeah, it sounded really painful. It didn't sound.
It actually kind of was. I hit a vein.
Oh, that's no bueno. Okay, so let's talk about why trashing is good, and let's talk about why certain cards are bad. So let's do the easy one first. Curses are bad. They're bad cards. They don't do anything unless they're bad cards. They don't do anything, and they're worth negative points. So you don't want curses in your deck.
Okay,
Great.
yeah, there's no unless. It's pretty universally determined that by that, and they're given out by attacks, right?
Yeah, great. So, like, I know there are edge cases where they're not bad, but I don't care. Curses are bad. You don't want them. If you can trash a curse, trash the freaking curse. Great. Moving on. Other junks that your opponents are going to hand you, like ruins or whatever, or maybe other cards that they're putting into your deck for you that you don't want. Like, oh, they gave me a silver with the embassy. I didn't want that silver. That's a junk card. Embassy's an attack. Yellow equals purple. Go
Calm
get me my
down.
shotgun, Billy.
Calm down, Appalachian Dominion noob.
Thanks,
Poor-
ADN.
poor- Poor Appalachian man doesn't understand how Dominion works.
A-
Doesn't understand that sometimes the silver's okay.
ADN. So that's like really
It,
close to my
yeah,
Spanish name, Adan.
there we go.
I just thought you'd like to know that. So anyway, other junks are bad, and I guess if you define junks as cards, you don't want sure they're all bad, but you want to trash them, you want to get rid of them, they're bad. Moving on, estates, they're bad cards, you want to get rid of them. I realize they're worth points, however, they're bad. They don't do anything for you until the game is over, and so like if you gain tempo by trashing an estate and it results in a 5-3 province split, I promise you that's more than the 3 points or 1 point differential that estate is going to be. So trashing estates is good because estates are bad cards. It's the worst card in your deck at the start of the game. Let's talk about coppers. Coppers are bad cards. I realize that when the game starts, copper is the best card in your deck. However, it is still bad. So you want to get rid of your coppers. So, like, a good example is, let's say you want to make $8 on your turn, and you have 5 cards to do it with. 8 is the cost of province. You kind of need to buy those to win the game. So, like, copper's not really helping you. I mean, it's better than estate, but if I had 5 coppers, I'm not getting to 8. I need something better than copper. So, copper's bad, and I don't want it.
And usually that leads to the conclusion that not having the copper in your deck is going to help you hit a hand that does make $8 to buy a province. Of course, we're going to tackle the question here when that assumption does not hold up, but typically that's why you trash coppers.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, never. I'm kidding. It's not never, but almost. Yeah, never's pretty close. Yeah, so, like, the point is, thinning these cards, getting these cards out of your deck, it's the strongest form of deck control in the game, and trashing is really good.
And when you're pulling the trigger on a question like when not to trash, there are a couple of things to keep in mind on those points. And one of the main ones is how good the things you envision your deck actually doing before the game is over are. And are they much better than simply keeping the coppers and estates around? Like we mentioned, coppers and estates are extremely inefficient. So unless the only thing you're envisioning your deck actually doing throughout the entire game is making $8 consistently and often and early to buy a province, the answer is almost always yes. Trash them as soon as you can.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, another way you can realize that these cards are bad, or other cards that you might put in your deck, is this concept of a stop card. And so I had this definition of stop cards, where it's something that doesn't contribute to your draw and doesn't give you plus cards. And there's a difference there, and the definition is a little wonky. And then I realized like there was this concept of deck control that I like using. So stop cards are just the cards that don't contribute towards your deck control. They're not helping you play other cards because they sit there, you draw them, and you can't get actions or cards from them. So, like, a cantrip is not a stop card, but a copper is a stop card. So, you need some stop cards in your deck. A lot of stop cards are really good because they have powerful effects.
We talked a lot about Develop in the last episode. Develop is a great example of a stop card.
Yeah, it's super great because it has a really strong effect, but it's not going to help you draw and play other cards. So it's a stop card. And most decks that do things that are good, that are worth anything, those decks have some stop cards in them. The stop cards are usually the point of the deck. So, I mean, they're not exactly good to have because they make your life more difficult. It's hard to draw them and play them. But, that's kind of a necessary evil. You need to have some stop cards in your life in order to accomplish things.
And having a lot of them can be seen as a little bit of a risk-reward scenario, especially when they're good ones. Like, not like Copper, which is a soft stop card that's not very good, as we addressed, but you take a look at something like Conspirator or Silver. Having a lot of those in your deck means that your deck is capable of doing more, but it also means that it's capable of doing a lot less when you don't get your non-stop cards to line up with it.
Yeah, so there's this push like to try and minimize the number of stop cards you have in your deck, and good decks do that, and that's important. It's much better than having the capacity to draw all 7 coppers that you started with and have those $7 every turn. Because decks that just don't have those coppers and also maybe don't even have the means to draw those 7 coppers, they're still very good because those decks are consistent. So there's the analogy that, well, boy, howdy, when I trash copper from a deck, that's the same thing as gaining a laboratory.
Wow. When did the Appalachian culture take such an interest in Dominion?
Since my tournament.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
wow, you're really making an impact.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I mean, there's kind of a comparison. There's similar ideas, right? But actually, trashing the copper is much better than adding a lab to your deck. I mean, if the lab draws a copper and then whatever else you would have drawn, sure, you have another $1. But the deck without those things in it is much more consistent. The more stop cards in your deck that you have, the higher of a chance that you have of drawing a turn with your initial 5 cards that doesn't do very much. So like a dud turn or a stall turn. And so you can think about just some reference points. Like, let's say I keep the 7 coppers in my deck, and those 7 coppers cause me to stall on 50% of my turns. It may be a little more, it may be a little less, but let's just put it here. So if I'm gonna get twice as many turns by trashing my coppers, because half my turns are stall turns, then if those turns are
or at least twice as much value out of the number of turns you take.
Yeah, so like if they're any better than $7, then it's definitely worth it for me to trash those coppers because I'm getting more overall value from my deck. And this may seem a little fuzzy, but it actually serves as a pretty good lower bound on how much of an impact these cards have on your deck. And an impact, I mean a negative impact having these stop cards on your deck has. I want to be putting stop cards like Goons and Bridge in my deck, those things that win me the game. I don't want coppers. Those are just as difficult to draw, but it's a copper. It's not Goons. Goons
yeah,
is
and it's more interesting to talk about these stop cards that are present in the kingdom because you don't see them every game. But at the very least, we can talk about silver and gold and say that those are objectively better to draw than copper, unless you have Coppersmith out, which you don't because it's not a card anymore. But anyway,
rip in peace, Coppersmith. We hardly knew you.
But you can at least understand that you would rather be drawing a silver than drawing a gold. So if trashing the silver gets the copper, or if trashing the copper gets it out of the way to draw the silver and the gold, that's good. The downside, of course, being that you had to trash it and then gain the silver.
Right. You said something a little weird there, but what you meant, I think, came across. Silvers and golds are better than coppers. Got it.
2 and 3 are better than 1.
Yeah, pretty much. And 55 is even better than the 2 of those.
Yes.
And so we're getting pretty close to we're getting pretty close to a point where we can say like, well, we're pinpointing on the benefits of trashing, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to illustrate them conceptually so that illustrating their absence makes more sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time when you're choosing not to trash, you've got the tools to do it and do it effectively in front of you, and you choose not to utilize them.
That's bad. I want to trash my cards.
But sometimes you've decided even if you do want to trash, you don't want to trash right now. Or at least you don't want to trash as early as possible.
So, like, never? I mean,
well,
what is this, like, if you decide to junk first and then trash?
There's that, but there's also the idea of something called tempo. And it's kind of an abstract concept of how, not just whether or not your deck is getting better or how much, it's how fast.
Jake, it's cold down here. I don't want to take my shirt off again.
Well, let's take a couple of examples to illustrate tempo.
Okay, sure. Let's hear this one. This will be good.
All right. So you open 5-2.
All right, sweet.
Right? And the first thing you see is mint.
Don't. No.
You buy
No!
And you trash 5 cards, and it's turn 1, and I just opened up 5 slots in my deck. I'm so good at Dominion.
Jake,
It's amazing. What's the problem with that?
you need to read an article I wrote about mint openings and why they're bad.
No, it is bad because it kills your tempo. So if the name, because then after that you have to buy a copper, and then next turn you have to buy a silver, hopefully by hitting 3.
This
And
is
if
the
the name,
worst thing ever.
and if the name of the game is efficiency, you think about the fact that you just spent a $5 buy and then 2 buys to acquire a silver, and that's not efficient, and that's what we're calling tempo. And that's an extreme example, the most extreme example I can even think of this concept,
That's...
other than opening donate and trashing all your cards, which you wouldn't do.
No, don't do that either. These are really bad. If you want,
Right.
I mean, I wrote a pretty long rant article about mint openings and why they're bad. And like, you can count on 2 hands the number of times where it's any good at all, and 1 hand where the number of times that I'm excited to do it.
Exactly. And that's an extreme comedic example, but there are more subtle examples that people don't realize they're doing that are actually similar to opening mint, more similar than they realize. A lot of the time it's going to come up with Chapel or any trasher that really gives you the tools to thin your deck as much as you want. And
I have a deck that's set up to be the optimal Chapel deck. Let's see how it plays out. Yeah, I guess don't do that.
Yeah. So a part of it is when you want to trash but not right now, and when you want to stop trashing. And one of the easy baseline rules of thumb you can go by is never take away your deck's capability to acquire a silver. And that's one of the few specific rules that I can come out on pretty much any board and feel pretty confident about. Is you're trashing too much if you have made it impossible to acquire a silver at any given point.
Yeah, that'll get you most of the way there. I mean, the correct answer is never going to be too far from that, for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be board by board, as everything in Dominion is.
Sure, and the idea, there's this idea of, you want to trash early on, and then you want to be drawing cards later. And, there's a balance between how much you want to be trashing. You want to let up on trashing before you've trashed all of your starting cards so that you have something to do. And, that's a pretty difficult thing to pin down. It's maybe at least a whole episode of the podcast. So it's certainly beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But I think something that'll get you really close is you want to trash your cards real bad. And if you can get down to just being able to buy a silver and build from there, that's going to get you pretty close to the perfect deck building order. And if you start from that point and start tweaking it and modifying how much you're trashing when you're doing it and the cards you put in your deck, you'll get a pretty good feel for what it's like to be building these very thin decks and starting to plan ahead several turns. And that's where you want to be.
At the same time, though, bear in mind that what we said earlier about the number of stop cards being in your deck kind of being a risk-reward dynamic definitely rings true when you and your opponent are both utilizing these trashing tools. Let's think about a game where you both have Chapel available to you and you're both trashing down to get your silvers and get it so that you don't have any coppers and estates and you're always drawing your silver and smithy and festival, etc. The player who trashes all of their coppers immediately, except for what they need to buy a silver, and then buys a silver and then starts building slowly from there, is actually doing it a little bit more slowly than the player who actually holds back a little bit on that trashing and takes the risk of not drawing the cards he wants immediately so that he can trash those coppers later after he's had the chance to build a little more.
Sure. Yeah. That's definitely a thing.
Yeah, bear in mind that. And that, again, is what's coming down to tempo.
Yeah, for sure. So we're putting our fingers on like what are the benefits we're getting on trashing, and so I mean obviously you want to play a lot of games where you trash cards to get a feel for it, but at the same time there are good decks out there that don't require trashing. So I'm thinking about these decks that have synergies between many cards. I mean, good decks have synergies between cards. I'm looking at
Usually, yeah.
City Goons, City Bridge, Royal Carriage Bridge, Fishing Village Wharf. These are all classic combos, and yeah, you don't need trashing to make these decks work. That being said, if you trash cards, these decks are going to get a lot more effective. And
Right.
that stems from the idea of most synergies in Dominion involve you drawing the two cards that have synergy and putting them in your hand. And that's a lot harder to do when you have coppers and estates getting in the way of your life.
So, all that in mind, eschewing the tempo argument, why wouldn't you trash at all when given the opportunity?
Why wouldn't you? So, I mean, coppers are worth money. So,
Right.
like you're giving up that money, right? And
Hmm.
also there's usually some resource you have to expend to actually get the game to allow you to trash the card. So I'm
Exactly.
thinking, yeah, I think it's opportunity cost is a good way to say it. Yeah.
Exactly. Trashing, it takes time. And it takes usually a terminal action. There are some non-terminal trashers, but they're normally terminal. And you actually have to buy the card that lets you trash. And like you said, it can all be summarized by the umbrella term of opportunity cost. And one of the biggest aspects of that is that most trashing in Dominion trashes out of your hand, not your deck or discard pile. There are some exceptions, but almost all of it is coming out of your hands. So whatever you trash is money you're not playing that turn. So as many strong points as trashing has, remember that turning a $3 hand into a $2 hand to trash a copper for no real benefit to yourself has to have some reason. You have to have some reason to not want to draw the copper later.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think about decks where this opportunity cost is going to be significant, and the things that trashing gets you, like enhancing synergies between cards and increasing the overall quality of cards in your deck, are going to be less. And so the big thing that comes to mind for me is big money. I
Exactly.
don't really care about synergies between cards. I care about the synergy between the treasure cards I play, and copper is kind of a treasure card, so it's not really that bad. So even in a big money deck, though, estates are not good at giving you money. So in big money, trashing estates is really good, and you want to do it.
But trashing coppers is a little different. And
Yeah,
in a big money deck, not being able to trash your coppers tends not to be a big deal at all. And that comes down to efficiency as well. If you think about the choice you have between trashing a copper to free up its quote unquote slot with the idea that you're going to then buy a silver and add that to your deck and put that in that slot, wouldn't you just be better off buying the silver and putting it in there? You're getting a very similar, if not the same effect, and you're spending one buy instead of two buys in an action.
yeah. So like it's good, which is why mine and Taxman and those kind of cards can be good for big money, but it's not super stellar. And I think a more
And
precise comparison here is like Moneylender, right? the
yeah,
the the opportunity cost that comes with Moneylender is $4 instead of three, which isn't a big deal because you can just open Moneylender, and then there's this action that you have to spend that you probably weren't spending on anything else because you're playing big money. So there's actually simulation data that matters here, and you can just compare Moneylender big money to regular big money, and you can
exactly.
directly see,
Yeah.
like, with no opportunity cost, what is the benefit of thinning coppers for my big money deck. And it turns out that those strategies are pretty much the same. Their win rate is close enough to 50-50 that, like, first player advantage plays a larger role in determining
Yeah.
the outcome of that game. Yeah, so the takeaway here is if there's any kind of opportunity cost associated with trashing the coppers from your deck, it's something you probably don't want to be doing in big money. And I guess there are a couple of exceptions to this rule. The first one is when you have Platinum and Colony. Usually trashing
Sure.
coppers is pretty good in Platinum and Colony games because you need a higher money density to get those colonies. But also,
Yeah.
if there's a junking attack available, it can become important to trash those coppers if you want to line up the thing that trashes curses with the curses that it needs to trash. So having a thinner deck and getting those coppers out of the way does have value by making your deck more resilient to trashing.
The other thing that it does for you in terms of defending yourself against attacks is remembering that the best defense is a good offense. A lot of the time, those junking attacks are giving you junk out of a pile, like the curse pile or the ruins pile. If you and your opponent are both playing marauders, every marauder you play is a ruin you don't get. It's not just a ruin your opponent gets, it's one that's not going into your deck because eventually that pile's going to run out. And thinning cards, trashing coppers, means that you're going to draw your marauder more often to do that.
Yeah, so there's the cycling argument. Even if you aren't able to trash the junks, that argument is there. It's not. I don't think it's quite as strong as the idea that you do want to trash your junks, but it is certainly a point in favor of it. And just because your opponent hasn't bought the junking attack yet, that doesn't mean that trashing coppers is something you don't need to be doing yet. Because your opponent can see, hey, they haven't trashed their coppers. I can flood them with purples with this Sea Hag that maybe I wouldn't have bought otherwise, or something along those lines. And now they're going to have trouble cleaning it up because they didn't thin their coppers in preparation for it. So that's something that you should keep in mind in big money games. Trashing even has value in those cases.
Exactly. The other thing that you need to keep in mind as a huge exclamation point in your head if you're ever thinking about ignoring trashing is, am I going to need to switch my strategy around based on something my opponent's doing? And if the answer is yes, you kind of need to stay thin so that you can do that.
Yeah, I would say that tends to happen a lot more in games with more than 2 players. Because the best strategy on the board can be much more affected by what your opponents are doing.
I wouldn't know much about that.
I guess not. But, it certainly is more of a thing there. It's possible in 2-player games, but I see it a lot more in games with more players. So, like, what about decks that aren't big money? When can you actually get a benefit by not trashing there? So we talked about consistency, and we talked about stop cards, and so if I want to get past the 7 or maybe 10 stop cards that I start the game with in my deck, I'm going to need to draw a lot of cards. So you're looking for huge draw, and Smithy, like, I know Smithy is OP, but it's just not going to cut it here. I'm looking at Wharf or Council Room, these cards that draw you just insane numbers of cards. Those are the kind of cards that are good enough for me to consider not trashing. And on top of that, you need that huge draw, but you also need to get the consistency that trashing offers you as well. So you need some way to reliably kick off your turns, and you need some way to reliably find enough draw to draw past those coppers. So I'm looking for villages that, like Coin of the Realm, or maybe Villa. These villages that you don't necessarily have to draw first, or maybe I'm looking at stuff like Scheme or Traveling Fair or Royal Seal that lets you top deck components for your next turn and continue to draw. These are the kind of things that I'm looking for, and I need all of them, right? I don't want just some of them. I want all of them in order to make my deck into something that is going to be better because I didn't trash. The benefit I'm getting is, right, I didn't have to spend time trashing the cards, and now I have these $7 extra each turn. But I have to build my deck much differently, and that deck has to have power in those specific ways, big draw and consistency, in order for me to consider doing that.
And not trashing doesn't just need to be viable in those cases. It needs to be the best decision. And I know that sounds obvious, but it is something that can be easy to forget, that if you're building a deck that's capable of functioning without trashing, you need to also be willing to decide that it's better for not having trashed.
Yeah, so another point, and I think it's relevant in this comparison you're making. In two-player games, in the end game, a dud turn there can just be game decisive. If I dud at the wrong time, I can just lose the game when we're going for points. And
True.
if you don't thin, it's going to happen to you more. So a more consistent deck, even if it's the same power level, is still going to give you more flexibility in the end game. A lot of games come down to who has the first dud turn, and then that person loses. And you're going to have a lot better of a time if your deck is more consistent. There's one more case where you don't want to trash, and there are three particular decks. They're what I like to call combo decks. These combo decks are sort of defined by the idea that they don't need outside support in order to be effective. The combo is so strong. So I'm looking at Counting House and Traveling Fair, Hermit Market Square, and Mandarin and Capital. These combo decks are so strong and so focused on that combo that the existence of outside trashing is something that's kind of been optimized away from the deck. So yeah, Hermit Market Square trashes some estates. That's part of what it does, but like you're not going to be looking for additional trashing. Counting House Traveling Fair doesn't care. Mandarin Capital doesn't care. Like you just want to shove those two combo pieces together, and the fact that there are 10 cards to start in your deck, it doesn't matter in these cases, and we know that because these combos have been tested to death, and just the best way we've figured it out is to not go for it. So like, how do you decide that on the fly? Hopefully the guidelines we've given you have helped with that, but those combo decks are kind of an exception to a lot of rules about Dominion, and trashing I think is one of them.
Exactly. And Adam definitely has more detail to go into on what those combos are and what they mean in more details in an article that he'll link in the description. But so definitely give that a look if you're curious. I definitely was. And
yeah, and there are good articles on each of those combos as well that are linked too, so you'll be able to access those if you want to know more about the specific combos.
The other situation where you are going to be punished for trashing too much is under the scrutiny of certain attacks. There are some attacks in Dominion that punish you for over trashing by doing that extra bit of trashing for you that you didn't want to do. If you get rid of all your junk, sometimes there are cards out there that'll sift through the junk and find the rest of the cards that you were relying to fill those slots for you. And what I mean by that are cards like Thief, which is now replaced by Bandit. We're looking at a card like Pirate Ship. And infamously, we're looking at a card like Knights. Knights is infamous for basically affecting player elimination in Dominion if you let it go too far.
Yeah, and you can't let yourself get too vulnerable to that.
Yeah, you can't let yourself get too weak to the night game, and if you trash all of your coppers and all of your estates, you start to look kind of juicy to
oh baby
to a Nightlock. And if you haven't been on the receiving end of a Nightlock, oh my, is it an experience. And I'm not even going to describe what it is, because the first time you do it to your opponent or your opponent does to you, you're going to know exactly what it is.
Feels bad, man.
You don't even have to describe it. A Nightlock is exactly just what it sounds like.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. I may or may not have been the one who put him through it the first time. No bigs.
It was so painful.
Yeah, so I would add Noble Brigand to the list of those attacks, but
sure.
Yeah, I mean, there comes a point where if you're relying too much on a small amount of cards that can be taken away by an attack, you can get screwed that way. And so the way you trash your deck can be affected by making sure you're not vulnerable to that kind of stuff. Maybe having some redundancy or some way to deal with it if you get hit by the attack.
And there's another one that isn't technically an attack, but feels like an attack in this situation, especially when you've thinned a lot, and that's Masquerade.
Yeah, so like I wouldn't want to not thin at all, But you certainly don't want to get so thin that you have to be passing good stuff to your opponent. That feels really bad.
Exactly. And the presence of these cards, none of them mean don't thin at all. In fact, you need to thin so that you can play them more often.
Yeah.
But you want to trash less than you would otherwise.
Yeah, you just have to be more judicious about it. So, like, yeah, what about gardens?
No. Gardens looks like you don't want to trash, but you still do.
Oh. What about Philosopher's Stone?
Your mistake was buying Philosopher's Stone.
Wow, harsh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a bad card. I've never had it do anything good for me.
It's
ever.
not a bad card. It's just not good
card.
when it's just not good when you want to be drawing a lot of cards. And it turns out drawing a lot of cards is amazing, so it's way better. But if you can't do that, then Philstone is actually pretty good.
If there is literally nothing else there that's any good, then yes, Philosopher's Stone is fine.
That's such a pessimistic way to look at it, though.
Silver's better. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, what did Philosopher's Stone ever do to you?
It lost me games. That's what it did to me, Adam.
Well, maybe you shouldn't buy it when it's bad, which is most of the time, but don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
right.
To reiterate, the reason that even though there are cards like Philosopher's Stone and Gardens that could theoretically be better if you never trash any cards because they reward you for having a lot of them, still actually reward thinning because the decks that acquire them are better when they're a little bit thinner because you acquire more of them. Let's take the Gardens spam deck, for example, where you just get as many cards as you can and fill your deck with Gardens. You're going to get more Gardens if you've thinned a little bit because you'll hit 4 more often. Don't believe me that it's possible not to be able to hit 4? Try it. I promise you, you can create a situation where hitting 4 is a dream turn.
Nice. I would say that's mostly true of Gardens, yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've got this protein rush here.
Ooh. You should have that looked at.
I'm filled with some Cons bologna here.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You should definitely have that looked at.
I mean, what I'd really like is maybe some starch, maybe something that's not so moist and delicious to help me grasp the sandwich.
Maybe
round out the
a
flavor
piece of
profile.
Bread.
Maybe better bread than this garbage white bread I have, but yeah, sure.
Honey wheat.
Oh my god, I love that stuff. So good.
So the bread this time is another kingdom, and it's going to be a kingdom that Adam and I are going to be playing over the next week, and we are going to make sure that we talk a little bit about the concepts that we've talked about today in relation to this kingdom. But today we are going to talk about City Quarter, Catapult, Farmer's Market, Caravan, Wild Hunt, Bridge Troll, Charm, Haggler, Mandarin, Replace, and the events that are available to buy are Bonfire and Raid. It's also worth noting that Catapult is a split pile, meaning that the first 5 cards are Catapult, and the 5 cards underneath that are Rocks. Again, for our audio-only listeners, we have City Quarter, Catapult, split with Rocks, Farmer's Market.
Farmer's Market! Boy, howdy!
Wild Hunt, Bridge Troll, Charm, Haggler, Mandarin, Replace, and we have 2 events that are able to be bought, Bonfire and Raid. So I think that this will be a really good kingdom to talk about some of the concepts that we have been, because it's a deck that is clearly very strong. There are a few things here that are better than simply buying a province every turn, but all of the trash trashing available comes at a high opportunity cost. Catapult trashing makes your hand much worse. Bonfire essentially costs you your entire turn, and you're removing 2 of what are currently your best cards when you do it. So opening with it can be dubious, and buying it at all can be somewhat dubious.
Say
So
opening with it is dubious, and I'm sitting here like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to open Bonfire, and I'm just thinking about what I want to do with my other buy.
all right, so Adam, you've told me what you want to do with 3. You're opening Bonfire, apparently.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. And Catapult's the only way to get rid of estates. I mean, replace kind of works, but hitting 5 is a little rough. So
While you have the estates, hitting 5 is difficult.
yeah, and especially since Bonfire is so important. So like, I'm pretty sure I'm getting Bonfire and Catapult on my first 2 turns.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's best, and I actually don't think this is close.
So Bonfire Catapult is where you would go. I might actually go with Caravan Catapult, and I would think about Bonfire Caravan, but I would be on the fence.
You're gonna open with an orange card over something that thins?
I mean, I'm getting something that thins either way.
I mean, so here's the thing. This deck is City Quarter is a big deal. It's the only village, and there are a lot of cool terminals you can play. You can play lots of Wild Hunts, or you can play lots of Bridge Trolls. You can play Replaces. All of these are a big deal, and you want to play a lot of them. And City Quarter is not a good card unless it can draw some cards with it, and then it becomes insane. And the best way to do that is to trash all of your non-actions. So I think getting thin really quickly is going to accelerate everything that this deck does. So I'm going to Bonfire early and often, and I'm going to get my action density up as fast as I possibly can. So I want to open with 2 things that thin. Man, Caravan just doesn't seem nearly as important as that stuff.
I think Caravan could help get you there a little faster.
Oh, man, I
Is
cannot
having-
wait to wipe the floor with you because you open Caravan.
Well, we have an entire week to playtest One Kingdom, and that's the luxury of it. But the other consideration here is what you're working toward. What's your end game on this board?
Because, like,
And that's tough.
yeah, I mean, it's really tough to ignore Wild Hunt. If you let that go uncontested, bad things can
Wild what?
happen to you. Wild Hunt.
Hmm.
Hunt.
Hunt. Hmm.
Yeah, that card. So it's really hard to ignore it, and so I feel like you kind of have to contest it. But then once it gets mirrored, you might transition into stuff like replacing Bridge Troll as your other payload, because Bridge Troll's are a really good card too.
Yeah. I mean, I think we both agree that City Quarter is definitely the vehicle for whatever the ultimately the vehicle for whatever your plan is to win the game.
Right.
And I actually might ignore Wild Hunt. I might just let my opponent do whatever with the understanding that my Bridge Troll spam is going to be fast enough with City Quarter as draw to outpace it, to have that miracle turn where I gain 5 provinces and it's really hard for him to catch up. To have it earlier than Wild Hunt can really pay off.
Yeah, so like my read is that that's not going to be fast enough, but I could see it. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if just skipping the Wild Hunt, going straight for Bridge Troll would be good. I'm not sure, though.
I don't think you need the draw that Wild Hunt provides because there's so much draw elsewhere in the kingdom.
Oh, you mean like, let's say you thinned really fast, and now your City Quarters draw 4 cards and then 7 cards? You mean that?
Look, Adam, we mean a lot of things, all right? This kingdom is great.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Bonfire is really good here.
A Bonfire is really good. I'm buying it. I don't know if I'm opening with it.
Okay.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Ooh, man, you could Bonfire Rocks and gain silver into your hand.
Oh, that's so good.
That's gotta
so
be
good.
good. No,
You couldn't even play the silver. Wait.
No, you
Put the
can't.
silver on your deck if this is your buy phase. Yeah, it
No.
goes on your deck if you bonfire.
Oh,
This is your buy
okay. It
phase.
goes onto your deck.
I can read the card. However, gaining rocks is usually pretty bad, so I don't think you want to do it
No.
like ever.
I mean, that's a pretty. If you're gaining rocks on this board, I think you have failed to see everything that your deck could do. Now, here's actually my question, Adam. Do you actually see Farmer's Market as being a good mid-game payload, or do you see it as
No.
something as being an unnecessary distraction?
No. Bridge Troll can empty provinces, so there's not time for Farmer's Market.
I wasn't saying like you factor Farmer's Market into your end game play. I meant, do you think that Farmer's Market is something to pick up on the way there to help you get more Bridge Trolls faster and eventually
No.
get the points?
Getting more Bridge Trolls faster is not the thing that Farmer's Market does. Farmer's Market gains you VP tokens.
Well, it also gets you money in the meantime. Buys. And it's an action for City Quarter to draw off of.
Yeah, I don't think it's very good here.
Okay. Well, I don't have strong feelings about it being good or bad, so it'll definitely be one of the things I try to work into my mid game, at least at some point, and we'll see how that goes.
Sure. Yeah. And, if you have suggestions, let us know what you think. We kind of did that last time, and it was good. And if you think we're missing something, tell us about it. You can go to the forums. You can go to adamhorton.com, and you can check out the blog and the forums. You can respond to us there on YouTube. Just about any place you find us. Talk to us about the podcast. And, we did this episode at the request of a listener. So we care. We're listening to our listeners. Does that mean we're indirectly listening to ourselves?
I listen to myself all the time.
Sweet.
I
Me
directly
too.
listen to myself.
Yeah.
I just love my voice.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think that's about it. Did you talk about the raffle?
Yeah, I was actually trying to avoid that because
the
last raffle, I didn't get to choose. You remember the Scorpion returned and he skittered off.
Oh.
And he's gone now, so I'm going to say that whatever lucky home he ended up in is the winner of our raffle.
I feel like the Scorpion won the raffle this time.
I don't ever want to hear about it again. That's how much I... Anyway, the winner of this week's raffle is going to get a very special prize. I had a birthday dinner recently, and my mother made my favorite dish. There are plenty of leftovers, and you... are welcome to have some if you are one of the lucky winners of this raffle.
Oh, wow. Get your raffle tickets in.
Yeah, or however we're...
Sounds great.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Delicious. I'm sure it's great, Jake.
Leftovers, yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's about all I got.
Yeah, me too. And we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we hope that you've learned a little bit about trashing and when not to do it.
Yeah, cool. And we'll see you next time for Making Luck, a Dominion podcast. You ready to go?
Okay, we're...